Walking into Retirement, an unusual podcast about finding purpose, meaning, and balance after a busy working life, with David Ailing-Smith and Peter Taylor. Exploring the emotional, psychological, and practical realities of modern retirement through a series of reflective conversations undertaken whilst walking scenic routes across the UK.
So on the 9th of November 2025, a 3-year experiment came to an end in a hot spring in Iceland as David and Peter recorded the final episode of their podcast, The Squid of Despair, unscripted podcast musings on business life, leadership, creativity, transformation, and more. They felt the conversation, which ranged widely from resilience, the quiet voice, Sisu, time travel, the positivity of hope and getting your mojo back, had reached a natural conclusion. But something else had been brewing, and they finally realized that it was they were both transitioning their lives. And whilst their experiences were in some ways similar, they were also very different in others. But that did not change the fact that they were both of an age and both needed to confront the inevitable. That was, to use a word that's not truly appropriate to their realities, the word retirement. And their solution to this was to return to their conversational style from the Squid podcast that they enjoyed so much, and to combine this with exploring, as friends, a number of walks in the UK whilst talking openly and honestly about the next stage in their lives, knowing that they were both in a safe place within these conversations, and there was almost certainly going to be a pub at the end of the walk if needed. Hello, Das.
I like that. That's good.
Good. See, I'm quite good at some things. So, okay, we're going to write a book, which is very exciting, is it not?
And it is.
We're going to certainly do a podcast, and we're hoping to write a book, shall we say?
Well, as you know, it's been a dream of me to do this with you, having watched you from afar deliver multiple books over the years. So now I'm looking forward to it. And it was interesting hearing you introduce the topic in that way. That was sort of a very gentle introduction to what I think actually is quite a big topic.
Yes,
I think it's a very important topic. I think it's something that, like life, death and taxes, it happens to everybody. And for my part, slightly further along the road than you, I don't think there's a lot written about it, or written about it in a way that I wanted to read. There's a lot of financial advice and a lot of sobering statistics about quality of life and time of death and that sort of thing. But in terms of the emotional and psychological impact of moving from a very, very busy, sort of high pressured, engaging life to one where you have a lot of time and a lot of choice, I think creates all sorts of questions that I'm really looking forward to explore with you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as ever, when a book idea comes to me, you look in the market, and there are a lot of very practical books about retirement, and there's also the kind of fun ones of 101 things to do when you've got all day to do it, things like that. But this, I think we're finding a different path through this, and I think it's retirement is not the black and white it used to be. It's not the work, stop, and that's it. That perhaps a generation or two ago was the reality.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that sort of new reality actually still has got some underpinning and some very big questions that we're facing, our parents face, and our grandparents face, but perhaps in a different way. So I think this transition calls to mind some big questions. It's things about identity, it's things about purpose, it's things about what am I going to do with my energy and my time and my health for the time I've got left, how long I've got left, what will that allow for, what will that get in the way of. And so these are big questions that I think during a working lifetime tend to get addressed through the big milestones like jobs and careers and strategy and objectives, KPIs, marriage, relationships, kids. Those big milestones tend to drive a lot of the answers to a lot of these questions when you're in it. But when you're out of it, it's a very interesting question, isn't it, as to what does that all mean? And I hope we can spend some time talking about that.
Yes, and we can. And I think the idea of this is to basically, our usual style is to kind of break down some very big titles or headings of things, and as we have those conversations, I'm sure we're going to spur off in different directions. But at the heart of it, I feel one of the things I looked at when I was beginning to put some thoughts together before I know I terrified you in a coffee shop the other day about, we were going to actually write a book and we're going to move quick on this one. So I apologize for that. But, it's all about momentum, I feel. But one of the things I looked up was that because one of the things I'm thinking about obviously is, do I trigger that state pension? And there's a psychological battle going on with me at this point in time about that. But when that state pension was first introduced, with a retirement at 65, I think the average life expectancy was only about 61 for working men, or men working in manual heavy industry.
Yeah.
So the vast majority didn't even get the pension right at the beginning. Now that's radically changed, obviously. And I think one of the things that sort of pivots behind all of this conversation is because that has changed, and because we have many, many years post this conceptual date of retirement, then there's a different aspect of planning for it, living it. These are things I think we are definitely going to have to explore and talk about.
Yeah, of course, and of course, very sort of current political dilemmas around the fact that the pension age has changed quite a lot during our lifetime, and it's changed considerably for women in a way that seems very unfair in terms of women of a certain age expecting to retire at a certain age, suddenly have 3 or 4 or 5 years before they can draw their state pension, which I can only imagine that the dilemmas that's caused for people who wanted to get out of work, needed to get out of work, but couldn't afford to get out of work. So there's a social element to this which has affected us a bit, but I think it affects women a lot more.
That is interesting. So okay, this is a pause in the podcast, but a sidebar, if you like, at this point. I mean, we're two men talking about retirement, and I think that is right for the essence of the book. But perhaps, just an idea at this point, a placeholder is perhaps, we go and find a lady of similar age, if you like, and just on one of the walks and have a third voice, if you like, to balance that perspective from a female point of view.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think these breaks in careers that as men we sometimes have inadvertently through redundancy or ill health, but we tend to for our sort of age group we've tended to have kept going. This is the first time we've sort of really stopped, but for women, of course, they have stopped in many cases to have a family and go back to work or don't go back to work. And so I think there is a different dynamic there, which is not our path, but I think it's very relevant for this book.
Yeah, I agree, and I think when I said in the short transitional intro, if you like, to this, that our worlds were similar but dissimilar, and mine, because of my career paths and the changes that have happened to me, is I've reinvented myself in a number of ways over the years, whether it be corporate working or non independent, and surviving more than once as an independent. Which again, I think brings a slightly different slant to my experiences and where we are compared to you, because you have been the the devoted corporate boy for many, many, many years, and I mean that in a nice way, of course.
Devoted corporate boy. I'm not sure that's a label I'd like to go to my grave.
No, all right, I'll relabel that.
One of your transitions, which you didn't mention, was sort of moving from work colleague to friend. I mean, that's been a transition in our lifetime, which has been a very nice one, which we should no doubt talk about at some point, because I think part of this walk is about friendship as well. You talked about having a safe space to talk about the hopes and fears and aspirations, because there's a vulnerability, isn't there, in talking about this sort of thing, because it's an unknown. And in fact, one of the things I've reflected on since I have stopped work is the number of paradoxes that appear. The things that gave you strength and confidence and certainty in a working life become actually a bit of a hindrance when you're not in that structure. So, for example, at work, you're extremely busy. And when you stop working, you're not busy. Yeah. And so, that's a paradox, which, sounds delightful, I think, when you're in a busy state, the fact that you've got time to do things. But when you've got a lot of time to do things, there are downsides to that. There's at work, you have that feeling of being valued. not being indispensable, but certainly being a very sort of important part of an important thing. And of course, when you stop work, you have this feeling perhaps that you're much more irrelevant than you were.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah.
And perhaps the third one, I don't want to overplay these paradoxes, but at work you have a control which is sort of defined by your role, your responsibilities. You're sitting within a structure where you have authority to do certain things. You can do them, you try to do them well. And so in a business context anyway, there's a lot of control that gets applied to what you do. But of course, in a retirement situation, you're sort of helpless in a way, in the sense that anything is possible. And so that rigidity, that command and control structure within which we all worked and which we all fretted, suddenly is not there. And it allows for so much. Don't get me wrong, I don't want this to be seen as a negative set of comparisons, but it's unsettling to a mind and a body that's used to working a certain way. And I'd love to explore these paradoxes with you a bit more.
Sure, and I think it's good. And from my point of view, one thing I totally, and you recognise this as well. If I'm not busy, I'm not productive. I mean, I as we joked about deadlines and things, but I do thrive for the deadline. I was always the boy who did their homework at the very last minute, and having too much.
How did that work out for you, Peter?
I have a fantastic, obviously, academic. I passed my exams when I needed to pass them. Enough. Let's move on. Let's not start with the teasing already.
Yeah.
And for clarity, we agreed I'd leave that school. So enough of that. It was a joint decision. But I don't. I mean, if I'm really busy, I'm hyper productive. And if I've got all day to do something, then I don't procrastinate. I don't think that's the right word. What I do, I just don't hit that point until very late in the day, or even possibly first thing in the morning, that I can work the way I need to work, and that one is of pressure productivity, and that's when I produce my best work.
And so there's an example. If you want to continue to deliver your best work, in a retired context, whatever that work is, you're going to have to create those deadlines, I suspect. You're going to have to find a new way of working, which is not one that you're familiar and expert with. And so I'm sure you can, and it's very liberating. There's so much goodness that comes out of having time and space and the ability to chart your own path a bit more. But of course, you have to make new rules, I think, new processes, new guidelines, if you're so inclined. And so I think it's and this is going back to the point about, I don't think there's a lot written about that, about that dilemma of having to make your own wind, to use that expression, perhaps, rather than be willingly blown along a path that you can anticipate.
Yes, and I think one of the things I'm going to be looking forward to is spending the time and going on the walks. I mean, another realization for me is that I've had a career which has been busy and driven, and and I'm like you, I've been blessed. I've been around the world and seen many places and worked with some amazing people, but as a result of that, if I look at the other side of the R word, if you like, if I was to retire, it's like, well, as a result of that, and if you like, as a result of my two careers, which are really, working in corporate life and also the good speaking and writing, I have a lot of connections, but not a lot of friends. I don't have a lot of interaction locally with where we are, because I tend to work on a global basis, and that takes my time, plus family. And I don't have any hobbies. I've never been a hobbyist in that sense.
Yeah.
I love writing and I love that kind of creation. But the thought of me pottering around the garden, 7 days a week, and on a Sunday wandering down and treating myself to the Sunday Times or something and a coffee, is terrifying.
Yeah, and I think it's those sort of introspective questions that we can talk about openly together, and maybe help any listeners we have, because what you've just talked about is what's important to you, and what's important to you in a work context. You've molded that to a very large extent, and very cleverly, to spend more of your time doing the things that you like and that you're good at. but without that work construct, what, as you say, what does that look like? It's easy to say what it isn't, but what is it?
Yeah.
And I think you've just described it very eloquently, but I think a lot of very busy, driven, successful, ambitious people have the same dilemma as to what's it all for, and what am I going to do with the time I've got left? And there's some classic routes through and out of this. A lot of people take the opportunity to do things that they've always wanted to do but haven't had time, like write a book, but perhaps work on their health, their fitness, give back, spend more time in the local community. But these are often new worlds. They're things that people haven't got the skills for, and a great opportunity to learn them. But it's a bit, you're vulnerable again at a time in your life when you feel less confidence, less strong, less able than you did when you were a 25-year-old thrusting young executive.
Okay,
Don't take that
well,
the wrong way. Don't take that the wrong way.
thrusted. Yeah, well, I guess that's a different story. Um, yes, and I think the other thing I was reflecting on, because it does, this is great that it makes you think. And you and I have both known some very, very wealthy people through our careers. Companies we work for, and there was often a time I think, well, why are you still working? You've made the money. Why are you not enjoying the money? And you begin to realize actually, no, it was less about the money and more about the drive and the achievement. And not that we lived at that level, but we saw it. And I think that begins to give some answers to that question I've always had is, well, you've made your billions. So why are you not on a beach somewhere having a great time and reading a book and drinking a sangria? But it doesn't fit. As I look at my own life, I can't just stop. There's no way. I would drive my wife mad, and probably myself.
Yeah. Well, I had a boss who's a friend now who did make a lot of money and stopped working, and then he went back into a very stressful job. And I said, why are you doing this? And he said very glibly, I just got fed up with daytime TV, which it was a glib statement, but it also was a statement of the fact that, like you've described, he's worked with his life, he was very good at it, he didn't have any hobbies, he was happily married, had a lovely house, had a lovely family, but he didn't know what to do with himself. And so he went back to the well and was very successful again. And I wonder, actually, as we talk about retirement, whether there are lessons here for people who are still at work. Just thinking about the thing I miss most today, given I'm 6 months in, is the people, because I'm a people person.
You are,
and
yeah.
I get a lot of energy from talking to people, and that naturally stops when you don't go and interact with a whole variety of people like you would in a work context. And so it makes me realize what a gift that is, when you go to work and you get to apply your trade or address your passions, be it people or numbers or planning, and it's a gift. And someone once said to me, I came out of a really tricky meeting once with some very senior people and I got absolutely eaten alive. And someone said to me, you must feel so fortunate right now. And I didn't feel fortunate. I felt very bruised, actually. And I said, why? They said, well, what a gift to be surrounded by such brilliant people who have, they are the names, the people who have made companies, made millions. They're inspirational in their field, and you've just sat around a table with them. And I said, well, I had my arse handed to me, but what a great experience. It's it's a gift. We're lucky. And I wonder whether that's an angle that when you work, you don't actually think about that so much. However hard it is, it's a real blessing to be able to play at the table. And we sort of miss it when it's not there, I think.
We do. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think another one I'd like to explore is something my father told me, and I said, he's still with us, fortunately, still living independently, but his comment that he made was one. He said, the hardest thing right now is how small my world has got.
Yeah.
He never lived like us. I mean, he was, he worked in the conveyancing world. He had his own company, but he did dancing around the whole of the UK. He never traveled the world much. He left the country once and didn't like it, but within the UK, he'd been everywhere. And but now, as he said, then he kind of retired and could drive, and then that wasn't possible anymore. And then he lost my mum, and then then he's go on the buses into the local town a couple of times a week, and now he can manage that once a month now. And literally his world is shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. Hairdresser comes out to him, other services come out to him. He's in all honesty, his excitement is when he ends up with an appointment at a hospital or something. That's a big trip, but in reality, his world has become so small. And it kind of sits with he does watch daytime TV a lot, and that is his companion now. But it's been a very slow transition over time, but it's also something that's on my thought horizon.
Yeah, well, I think that's the scary thing, isn't it, for lots of us when we contemplate that. I'm not saying your dad's unhappy, but the difference between the way you've just described that and the way our lives are lived. And when you think about the things that are fundamental to the way we've been during our working lives, our interaction with people, like I just said, perhaps for me, the curiosity, the humor, the sort of energy you get from learning new things, and the thought that gets taken away from you potentially is horrifying. And so you then think about, well, how do I not let that be taken away? How do I continue to make sure that I remain curious and mix with people and get energy and go off and learn, do things? And so that comes back to your health question, actually, whether you're lucky to have your health. But I'm sure, and I hope throughout these conversations, and how I like a list, we can continue to propagate ways in which we can maintain the things that are important to us in an environment where they're not available every day automatically, like they are for so many of us at work.
Yeah, quite. And I think, we're not going to be a financial guide. Financial advice cannot be given by us, but there is another reflection. I mean, these days, within reason. I mean, it's not, not crazy, but if I'm reading the Sunday paper and see a show that's on in London, or a new restaurant's open somewhere nearby or whatever, then it's not much to go, let's go see that. Yeah, okay, let's do it. And then you spend some money, and because there's always more money coming in next month. At a certain level, and that again, that sensible approach to management of money is something that's also going to change in the future.
It is, and as you say, we should let the experts deal with the sort of the expertise required to have the serious conversations about how one manages one's money. But I think there are two dates. I mean, one often talks about how long have you got to live, what's your expectation, and how much money have you got, and divide one by the other, and there you've got a sort of a crude budget. But of course, there's that quality of life thing relating to what I just said. How many years you've got the energy to go up to London and see the show, or to go and travel to the other side of the world to a new country, or to learn a new skill. I suspect that date is much closer than the date which we pop off this mortal coil. And so there's an element here about applying your financial reserves to the quality of your life rather than the length of your life, which is perhaps a conversation we could have as well.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, Peter, about the walking side of this, because you've done some walks together, looking forward to that. And you talked about walking as being a metaphor for retirement. You've talked about, and the title of the podcast, Walking into Retirement, is very much yours, which I really like. Tell me some more about that. How do you think the walks interact with the experience we're having here? Are they related, or is it just an opportunity to free our minds, get somewhere high and think big thoughts?
Well, I think one is a purpose to the conversations. I think something different. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I did love the episode that we did in Iceland, where we snatched conversations at various fantastic landmarks in Iceland and had a conversation. And I thought that was quite stimulating and interesting, because it wasn't just us getting on a call and talking for an hour. It was me surprising you with a microphone next to a geyser, which I know you're still proud about.
Well, and those enormous eruptions, which were very
let's not go there again, goodness me. So I like that. So I'll be honest, there's a number of things coming together. I mean, I know we spoke at the end of the last year about, what can we do together? And I know I was kind of reticent with that because I hadn't found my vehicle. I hadn't found the vehicle. And what you're seeing now is this is the way that Peter works. He finds something and then hooks into it. And the title "Walking into Retirement" is a great title, I think, because it does reflect that we should, walk purposely towards retirement, not run, not walk blindly, not jump off a cliff or anything like that, because it is so more complicated these days because of the financial situations, the length of life, the health, all of those sort of things, the opportunities that many people have, the fact it isn't a full stop anymore in lives, perhaps as it used to be. So that kind of walking metaphor strikes well for me, I believe. And I think the other thing is, these conversations are great that we do, but we sit at the either end of a Teams call and we chat to each other without the camera on. This feels, oh God, now I'm going to become vulnerable, aren't I? Because this feels like it's a far more personal conversation. I think we're going to learn a lot more about each other, that even though we know quite a bit. I think your introduction that you shared with me was, there was some things in there I didn't know about you. Getting a job from the neighbour for 5k in a car. I mean, well, heady days in those days. Absolutely.
How quickly I was diverted from my then passion of studying parasitology.
I know. And then at the end of your career, your expenses are a lot more than that, like your annual salary. So it's a different world. But no, I hope the walking. Well, I do want to walk. I love walking. I walk every day, whatever. And I'm out there. And obviously wherever you live, to a degree it's repetitive. Like it's always different, but it's also repetitive. So going 2 walks would be great. Juliet doesn't want to go on walks unless I get a dog because she doesn't see the point of walks. So going for a walk with you and having honest conversations that perhaps will make us feel a little uncomfortable every now and then, I think is going to be therapeutic in some ways. And I think it's going to help me evolve my future state and hopefully, a little bit for you as well.
I'm sure. So just to clarify, so I'm a virtual dog, am I? What sort of dog am I?
If you were a dog, what dog would you want to be?
No, actually, let's not go there. I mean, I did know. As you know, we had a St. Bernard for 5 years, and he was a fantastic dog. But you know how they say owners get like their dogs? It was true, mate. You know what a lovely jowly face a St. Bernard's got. That was me after 5 years with him. It was quite scary, really.
Well, I don't think you lost as much hair as you did, but
actually, that's true. But I am intrigued by the metaphor because we will be going up metaphorical hills together, won't we? We will be crossing streams together. We will get lost. We will argue about which way to go. So there, I think it works, Peter. It's a really good idea. I think. Well done.
Yeah, and I think one of the big questions is, are we having a separate thermos flask or are we having one big one?
Well, separate, obviously.
We're not that close.
Exactly.
Good. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we've I know we're struggling a little bit with dates, but we've got a walk coming up, and then we'll take it from there, I guess.
We will. So, yes. So, well, I mean, this will be a podcast, and we invite all of our Squid fans to join us again, and to invite as many people that are perhaps going through something like this as well. And we'd love to have a good conversation. And I think one of the other important things, yes, it's going to be Dad and myself on walks talking to each other, but we would really love to hear from people about things that perhaps we haven't thought about and thoughts that they might have. So we do need the general public on this journey as well.
You have been listening to Walking into Retirement, an unusual podcast about finding purpose, meaning and balance after a busy working life with David Smith and Peter Taylor. Find out more at www.walkingintoretirement.com, and why not share your own retirement stories with the hosts?